Good evening, America, and good afternoon, Australia. You're back listening to Toni Lontis live on Radio Toni Every Day Business. Now, for those of you that are listening live online on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and LinkedIn, just know that Peo is listening live online and he's ready to answer any of your questions. He's also ready to send you any links from the discussion on the show today, and we look forward to interacting with you today. Now, for those of you who are new to the show, each week, Everyday Business interviews someone prominent in the business world, and I love talking to female leaders from across the planet. This wonderful lady today is a particular favourite of mine, and I can't wait for our conversation today. So let me tell you a little bit about Julie Trell. Julie is the country lead Australia for SHEeo after helping to launch it in the US. She has been challenging and inverting norms throughout her career, making waves with her fresh perspective and innovative thinking. When she redesigned a previous job title to Vice President of all things fun, meaningful and rewarding at Salesforce Foundation, it was a powerful reinforcement of her values, which quickly become an integral part of the workplace culture around her. Julie's career has centered around building connections between people, programs, and ecosystems. She describes herself as the human API, capturing her ability to utilize her network to empower startups by spotting opportunities and acting as a catalyst for growth and development. She's currently building her Playful Purpose practice. That's a tongue twister. Engaging leaders in every stage and experience level to use their other AI to become more competent, empathetic, and adaptive. This interview today I've been looking forward to for a long time, and Julie's a very busy gal, so it's taken us a little while to get her live online, and I'm wonderfully grateful to have Julie here today. Good evening, good afternoon, Julie.
Good evening, afternoon.
There we go.
Good evening and good afternoon. I'm excited too. You're making me feel so welcome, and thank you.
Absolutely. Now, just listeners, before we jumped on the show, I got to meet Julie's gorgeous puppy dog who is sitting at her feet. Now, I don't mind if we have dog appearances on our interview. So listeners and watchers, don't be alarmed if this beautiful dog jumps up to give her mummy a kiss while we're having our interview. Julie, what brings an amazing American gal to Australia in the first place?
The short answer is serendipity, flip-flops, and a love letter to Mary Poppins. So that's the short answer. The longer answer is, do you want to dig? Do you want to ask questions into those three?
Absolutely. I would like the long answer because it's a fascinating story, and I want the audience to know what brought you from across the shores to our shores.
Yeah.
For which we're very grateful.
Yeah, well, I'm thrilled to be here and get to meet wonderful women like you and wonderful people on the other side of the world. So what happened was a friend of mine in London posted on her Facebook that her friend in Sydney was looking for someone to fill her flip-flops. So this woman is English. So in Australia, they call flip-flops thongs. So it would have been very different if it said looking for someone to fill my thongs. So I said to myself,
interesting.
Yeah, I like flip-flops. So I'm going to reach out and see what this is all about. And so Annie Parker, my predecessor, was talking about this role to fill her flip-flops. She wore flip-flops everywhere, to run the corporate accelerator for Telstra being the large telecoms down here. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And I put my yes and hat on, which I hope we'll get to later. Put my yes and hat on. I was like, I'm going to have this conversation. This sounds interesting. And she explained what the role was, and it's working with founders in the startup ecosystem. And it was all very, very exciting. And I went to sleep that night and I imagined myself in Australia, and it was great and wonderful. And then I woke up and I'm like, who do you think you are? You've never been a founder. You can't run this program. You know, that voice, the imposter voice, her name is Beatrice. So I put her aside I put her aside, and I can only imagine you've mentioned the Harvard study where men will apply
Yes,
for roles where they only have, a limited amount of the skill set. So I said,
requirements for that job.
I'm going to continue to have these conversations. So I kept saying yes. And she took a chance on me and flew me down to Australia. It was beautiful. It was perfect. I couldn't have been a more perfect sales pitch. And so I came down here. Now, this job description that I read was very heart-centered and heartfelt. And because someone had told her to write a love letter to the person you want to hire, which is a practice I now use. What's the love letter of who you want? And it was something like, look, someone who has the gravitas to work with corporates, is more excited about others than their own personal gain, believes in the startup ecosystem. I'm like, okay, tick, tick, tick. So these were really intangible skill sets. And it was this beautiful letter. So I came down here, settled in, all things. 3 weeks later, I then read the Telstra job description for the same role, which was it was the same job, but written very differently. So that's why I say it was a love letter to Mary Poppins, because showed up, it's what she wanted, like the kids, Jane and Mary, wrote for the Mary Poppins to show up versus what Mr. Banks wrote. So that's how I got here.
I want to explore that whole concept of corporate and heart-centered, and how it's different and how it's going to change the world, Julie.
Yeah, so it was really eye-opening for me moving from San Francisco, and I literally I grew up at Salesforce in the corporate world up there, which was very forward-thinking. CEO Mark Benioff, that's also another serendipitous conversation, how I got that role. But I came down here and chose to not really reinvent myself, but be who I really wanted to be. And play was my word. Play and curiosity, and we need more of it. I was a former classroom teacher as well, so we need to have more of that growth mindset. And I didn't know any better. I didn't have the curse of knowledge, which was helpful. But I did, when I did come down here, people were warning that Australia is very misogynistic and racist. So, I held that, but I chose not to seek it out. I chose to show up differently. And so I would do this game and play stuff. It's what we used to do as kids to learn, to grow, to progress. Why can't we should still be doing it. So for example, I was at this wonderful leadership offsite, and we had to read case studies and then report back. And I said, let's have fun with this. Instead of just reading the case study and having conversation, let's be a human PowerPoint. And I just brought it up, and I created these safe space, and they were all senior leaders at Telstra, and they were willing to try. I don't know how I got them to do it. I didn't know any better. This conviction, let's do this. So we pretended we were a slide on a screen, and then the presenter would say click, and we would change shapes, and he would explain what the scene was, and people loved it. And every time then they were in my group with me, it created a safe space to play and be silly and be authentic.
Yes. And that whole concept sort of lended itself to your passion for supporting people who are in the startup area and in business, didn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Because doing it alone, being a founder is hard. Doing it alone is even harder. So creating the right community so we can connect those dots and help one another. And there was also, I found a very different culture, business culture from the US, North America to down in Australia. There's a lot more fear, and aversion to risk is a lot higher here.
Yes. I agree. All of those points that you've made so far, Julie, it's good to hear someone from the outside actually put words to those, what has been my experience as well, the ingrained misogyny and the fear of doing something different. When we just let go of those things, magic happens. Which kind of, I want to go back to before you come to Australia, and quickly I'd love to talk about Salesforce, because I want to get to the bigger conversation around SHEeo. But before you got to Australia, you worked with Salesforce. Tell me about that experience as well, and those conversations you alluded to earlier.
Yeah, so I was a classroom teacher and a technology specialist in a middle school. So you talk about inverting norms. I was never following the normal got pathways. I had met Mark Benioff in Israel in 1998. Now, this was before, we were still getting AOL on CDs, and he wanted to sell software
Yeah.
over the web. That was crazy back then. And, so that was interesting. But he also wanted to bridge the digital divide, which is where I was working in, and making sure that schools and students had access to technology. Yes. This digital divide, unfortunately, has gotten big again with COVID and the access to technology. But so I spoke to him like, oh, that's what I get. That's really cool. And I said, Mark, if you're going to deal with kids and technology, you need to hire teachers. Don't just be a company that gives away money. Again, I really didn't know what I was talking about, but I just had that passion. And he says, okay, why don't you move out to San Francisco and help me start the Salesforce Foundation? So I was there very early days, and we got to build the culture there of the 1-1-1 model. I was curriculum imagineer, technology inspirer, and volunteer energizer was another title that I had.
Yes.
And so there wasn't a pathway written out already. There wasn't a roadmap. And so we could create this and take those risks because it was a safe space created. So that's what I like to do also, making sure that there's a safe space to take risks, to be silly, to take away that judgment. And so, yeah, I grew up there, I say. I was there for 12 years.
Oh, fantastic. Amazing. And now I want to, so you started there, you replied to this amazing invitation, arrived in Australia, and then part of the work that you've been doing is around SHEeo. And as you know, I'm just as passionate about SHEeo as you are. So let's talk about SHEeo. Let's tell the audience about this glorious community for women.
Yes. Well, when I came down here again, my predecessor had launched an organization while she was running the program I was running, said, if Annie can do this, I can do this. So I'd launched SHEeo in the US because I was following what I call Vicki Saunders. She's the founder of SHEeo. So she's full credit. She's the outside thinker. What I refer to that TED talk about first followers, and she's the lone nut dancing out on the field. If you've ever seen this 3-minute TED talk, how to start a movement. And she was out there, the only one dancing, but it made sense and it was fun. And I was going to follow her. And she saw that systems are broken let me reframe that. Systems are not working for everyone. They're working for the people that they were designed for. And so they're not working for everyone. And what I like to call the underestimated, not underrepresented, not disadvantaged, but the underestimated, because they do things very differently. And women like you, women of all different ages and backgrounds across Australia, this is how I got to learn my states of Australia, have contributed to this fund, and which gets loaned out at a 0 interest loan to women-led ventures that are working on the world's to-do list. Now, that's a nice way of saying the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's so women get to I have year 12 girls or year 11 girls all the way up to year 90-year-olds. My mom is an they're called activators. The women that contribute their capital are called activators, because it's not just, you're not a donor, you're not a investor, you're activating your capital, your buying power, your network, your expertise. So it's been an amazing, and the women that show up, they get something different. Everyone gets something different out of it. So I'm going to actually throw this back to you. What I get out of it is this amazing network of women who are so keen to support one another. It's not a typical support network. I'm also getting to meet hundreds of amazing women who are leading companies and getting to learn more about their companies. So, and across the globe. So now I want to know, what excites you or inspires you? Why do you love SHEeo?
I think it's about that supportive community. So I've done a lot in traditional business and in traditional networking sense. And I found, and this is not man bashing, but it's acknowledging that women do things differently, that we often act from an intuition and a knowing versus a logical, this is what you have to do. And so for me, I was introduced by the gorgeous Marianne Anderson on the Gold Coast, who I sort of felt at the time was almost a little bit stalking, But that wasn't it. She was passionate
Yeah.
about this group of women who supported other women at various stages of business and owning companies and starting up and pursuing ideas and entrepreneurship, essentially. And so I started a number of years ago, and as a venture. Now, when we talk about activators and ventures, a venture is a startup or a small business or a company that has an idea that is worth spreading and worth working on. And SHEeo funds you. So the application process was the easiest. I'd done grants and stuff before, but the SHEeo application process for capital fund investment was so seamless and so easy that I'm like, wow, this is really good. And then I got to start to hang around with those activators and ventures and discovered a group of women and a bigger community and a worldwide network of women that were heart-centered, Julie. Like, I guess that's the biggest thing for me. The women that I've met in and around SHEeo are all heart-centered women, and they encourage these beautiful things in the network, including ask and give. And so another wonderful thing to learn as a woman, we give and give and give and give and give and give and give again, but we find it more difficult to ask. And that's one of the key things that I'm learning hanging out in SHEeo is that whole ask concept. So,
Yeah.
Julie, there's a whole range of other things in and around SHEeo. Do you want to talk about some of those things that for people interested in SHEeo?
Yeah, well, you said there's so much in there. I wanted to go back to that question about love and business. So one of the ventures,
Yes.
Yaz from World's Biggest Garage Sale, she is passionate about that, and she will talk about they shouldn't be separated, and she's heart-centered, and she finds investors and supporters and advisors that get that. And it's not about the money. She takes the money that has love wrapped around it.
Yes.
The other thing that I wanted to mention, you talked about the application process. So while
Yes.
it's not just about getting capital, it's getting this network. And even that you weren't selected in the final end, the process in and of itself was very valuable. So applying as a venture, and the criteria to apply as a venture is minimum of 50K in revenue, up to 2 million in the last 12 years. It is structure agnostic. You don't have to be, you could be a nonprofit. So whatever if there's earned revenue, it needs to be 51% women led and women owned. And that's pretty much the criteria. And then, as you mentioned, it's 12 questions. Don't overthink it, because women who are in year 10 to 97 are going to be reading the application. And it's interesting. I find a lot of women like, oh, it's not right. I don't think I should. The practice of applying is a process of marketing and exposure. I have, again, through the application process as an activator, I've met so many women, and I have followed them. And if they didn't make it to the final end, they're still in the network. They're still in the community. We still lift them up. And then the final thing I want to talk about, the ask and the give. You talked about women love to give. And yes, it's harder to ask. So flipping that on its side, if you're not asking, you're depriving women of the things that they love to do, which is give. So flip that ask on its side.
Absolutely. And then add to that weekly calls with amazing women that give you amazing insight into all things business and life. So it's not just business focused, it's about a whole greater range of information and knowledge that you get from hanging around and interacting with these women. And so I was reading a bit about Vicky Saunders just the other day, and I like to go back and read what her original vision was. And for those of you listening, this fund is an ongoing fund. So SHEeo gives the money out, you pay it back interest-free over 5 years, and it creates a perpetual fund so that you can keep giving to generation after generation after generation of women-led enterprises. And the rate with which that fund is added to just keeps it going. It's a perpetual fund, isn't it, Julie?
Yeah. So our daughters, granddaughters when we ask them, so where'd you get funding? Well, duh, I went to SHEeo. So it will be a household name or concept, because I just want to, we are very inclusive, and sometimes the word SHEeo isn't the right inclusive word, but the concept, the culture, the energy, the message is what we're all about. I want to mention one other thing about being that inclusive and learning things differently in the calls that we have. Yesterday, we had this amazing global Indigenous event, all led by Indigenous women in the SHEeo network from Canada, the US, New Zealand, and Australia. And one quote that I want to read that came out from Tara Fraser, one of the amazing activators, is the Indigenous voice, worldview, and wisdom is what the world desperately needs and is the pathway home for every trouble before us.
Absolutely.
So listening to First Nations, to Native Americans, to Aboriginal culture, to Maori culture, there's wisdom in that. And Vicki takes a lot of that concepts on how to build a system that will work for more people.
Yeah, I have to agree, Julie. We need to be tapping into that. This is ancient wisdom and knowledge. And if we just tapped into that, we could, change the way humanity interacts, the way that we support each other. And one of the things that drew me to SHEeo was the whole idea. One of the first things I read was about the fact that women were so underrepresented in terms of gaining capital for their companies, their startups, their businesses. That was the first thing that struck me, because I'd encountered that throughout my life, that if you were male, white male in particular, then there were access to things that you could do before I could get anywhere, even as a white woman, but less so if you were an Indigenous woman or a minority woman, or with an ethnic background that wasn't from a major group. And that was the first thing that struck me with SHEeo, was that they like supported the underdog, I guess you could say. Which
and back to those systems again, it's not about looking for the next unicorn. It's not necessarily about the money. So getting capital also can be in the form of customers. I'm going to go out and buy stuff from you, and you're going to get, that's one way of getting the revenue. The other thing that happened because of COVID, many of the companies struggled, and this network rolled up their sleeves to make sure that these companies did not fall over in any way, shape, or form that they could.
Yeah, it's a very powerful, dynamic network of women across the planet. So if you're in Australia, you have access to amazing, powerful women in the US, in the UK, in Europe. It's all over the place. And I know that Vicki's vision is to have it a household name. And I have no doubt that it will be a household name and the place where women go for support and a whole range of things. Julie, I know that you're passionate about founders and startups. What is it about startups and foundation entrepreneurial endeavors that rises that passion in you?
Yeah, it's like playing in a sandbox, because these entrepreneurs, these founders are solving problems in the world that impact them, and they recognize it impacts others. So the fact that there's not a playbook that's written for them yet, they're figuring it out as they go, they go away. That's why my role, I wasn't a classroom teacher and fit the mold of every other classroom teacher. I was a technology specialist. So I couldn't be judged.
You were outside.
I was outside, but I couldn't be judged like everyone else. And I color outside the lines. And that's what I love about entrepreneurs. They have less of this fear of taking risks. They're passionate. They're independent. They're not beholden necessarily to a corporate entity, of their pathway. And don't get me wrong, I can speak both languages, and I have massive respect for both language startups and the corporates. And I just love to see what they can do, and watching the light bulb go on. That's part of the reason I went into teaching, is that those aha moments. So I like to be like the producer behind the scenes, and to see others help others thrive and have success.
Yeah. And in that startup and founder group, you found certain patterns and qualities that you've seen play out and have a bigger impact. What are those qualities that you've seen, Julie?
Yeah. The first one that comes to mind is resilience. And because
Yeah.
as a founder, as a entrepreneur, you're going to get no a lot of the times. You're going to have to figure out how to redesign. Okay, this message didn't land. I got to try it again. And I actually did a fun activity with our founders at Miro D. You know, Shark
Yeah.
Tank or Dragon's Den, wherever you are in the world, and where the founders to come in and pitch to these sharks that are, you know, it's kind of scary. What I did was we did a baby Shark Tank. Sorry for the earworm, but baby Shark Tank, where I had the judges were kids ages 7 to 12. And the founders had to pitch their company to the 7 to 12-year-olds. So what made that they had to do was speak in a language that a 7 to 12-year-old would understand, be open to feedback, because these 7 to 12-year-olds were very honest. And it opens up gaps or things that they may have missed. And in getting them to reshape and reframe and think differently, and take advice, not all advice, because there's a thing called mentor whiplash or advisor whiplash, but just the resilience, the creativity, and just to move on, that's one of the things that's really one of the patterns that I see often for successful founders.
Yeah. Fantastic. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about in this interview was the other AI. What is it?
Okay, so the other AI is what I call applied improv. So if you've seen the show, if you've ever watched improv, like Whose Line Is It Anyway? I've just been watching Thank God You're Here. We improvise every day. We don't have a script. We don't know what's going to happen. And there are these principles of improv when you're playing with someone on stage. So there are these written, unwritten rules, which is saying yes and moving a scene forward. If you watch a scene where someone's out there and saying, oh my God, isn't it a cold and chilly night? And the person's like, no, it's the middle of summer and it's morning. Well, the scene's dead. The scene's not going to happen. Whereas if you apply this yes and, like, think about it in a business meeting where you're talking about here's an idea and someone shuts you down right away. No, that's not right. You can't happen. Are you going to contribute to the meeting again? Are you going to, it's very difficult to contribute again. Yes. One of the other concepts is make others look and feel good. So when you're watching performers, improvisers, they are going to set each other up good, and they have to be in the moment, in the present. We talked a little bit about that. We touched on like being in the present and if you're making everyone look and feel good, you're going to look and feel good yourself. So side note, this is the next pandemic I want to create, is making everyone look and feel good. No vaccine required. And so if you're taking a lot of these principles,
that's a really good line.
Steal it.
That's a really good line.
The next pandemic is making others look and feel good. No vaccine required. And listening with curiosity and being surprised. So when you're listening, when you're on a scene and you don't know what the next line is, you really need to listen and pay attention and listen curiously. You can't have a line or how is the scene going to go next in your head. It's not going to work. So I use games and activities and then debrief a lot of these games that you'll use as improvisers with people in the corporate, and it builds confidence. It helps with communication. It helps with stepping in other people's shoes. So we talked about authenticity, vulnerability, and that's what I call applied improv. Now, I truth be told, I struggle with it sometimes because companies or people hear the word improv and they're like, I got to be funny. I can't do that. It's scary. Or the word play is not serious enough for business. And truth be told, I struggle with how do I message this? Because play and improv, those are my words. How do I get into selling this to other people? But I have found it to be medicinal, therapeutic, and meditation in action. And that's really what it is, because you need to be in the present when you're doing it. So it combines all those fun things.
Yeah. Julie, just I've been reading a few bits and pieces online and through newsletters lately about the changing face of corporate business. And on a post recently in LinkedIn, there was a big discussion about working from home and flexibility around corporate roles and in business. And there were a couple of comments that alluded to, oh, that's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. I actually believe, and I want to discuss this a little bit further with you, I actually believe that there's a rising of feminine energy that needs to rise and that creates a different dynamic across the powerhouses of companies across the world. And I absolutely believe that it needs to happen, which means that those big companies need to consider doing business in different ways, which allows for creativity, inventiveness, flexible workplaces, and a different way of doing things. I feel really passionate about this, Julie. Do you feel the same? Do you feel that, like, I feel that in the next 10 years, we will see business playing out in a different way? And those that aren't embracing some of these different creative, inventive ways to do business will be left behind. Do you feel that?
Yeah, I really do. I had a lot of thoughts going through my head while you're sharing this. One thing that I did see, we didn't, so we were really lucky here in Australia. However,
Yes.
I have lots of friends who, the homeschooling, the small homes, and the dads having a new role and having more understanding what mom had to go through. And I think a lot of them who are in corporate have a hopefully more empathy for what needs to be done, and being willing to change the system. And this, what's always been done, is not necessarily going to benefit everyone.
Yes.
Plus the fact, because of it, people are moving outside of the cities and they're moving further away. I can still get my work done and do all of this. And it's a different, so I think people need to let go of that fear. It's not a zero-sum game. If
It
you're
is.
lifting others up, you're not going to lose your own. You will, again, making others look good and feel good, you will rise with them. Talking about women, men and women, or underestimated people, give them a chance and open those doors and lead the pathway for them. But I do think things have changed with the technology. I've seen it change in the education space. Do you remember life without one of these, without an iPhone, without a Google Maps at your hand? So I do think because of this global pandemic, we are thinking differently. We have to behave differently. And change the way things are done. So I definitely agree, but there's still some energy that needs to be shifted, and creating safe space to do so.
Agreed. And it comes back to, for the world to thrive and for humanity to thrive, there needs to be that balance between masculine and feminine energy. And at the moment, the feminine energy is not at a balanced level. And I don't think that that's something that men need to fear, because balanced energy will achieve wonderful outcomes in life, in business, and in spirit. And I think that by embracing some of those concepts, we'll only have better businesses, have better corporations, have better companies, and have better conversations across the world. It can only be a good thing. So the other thing that you've been working on in the background is this amazing company called Playful Purpose. Can you tell the audience about Playful Purpose, Julie?
Sure. So Playful Purpose I've had for a while. It goes back to my whole belief that play is how we grow. It's how we learn. I have from Piaget, everything we've learned is through play. And I work with companies on doing applied improv, sneaking in that play into the businesses. So it's a tool, it's a tech, it's a if you will, a non-technical technology and how to apply this when you're in meetings, when you're having one-on-one meetings with your team, when you're talking to customers. So these are our strategies, and I design workshops through that. I also am working on with strategy and design thinking, and I have found I realize I can't do it alone. So facilitating workshops I know that I need a co-facilitator with that. And in these facilitated programs. So I just did a workshop with Playgroup New South Wales, which was a lot of fun. I mean, this was, if I didn't do play with Playgroup, that was just, I missed the boat. So we played with a whole bunch. We got them to live, not just talk about, but live their values. And I'm still figuring it out. I don't have it all nailed down. I still don't have the perfect website, even if the URL goes to a website right now. But it's having fun and posting and having these conversations, and throwing, coloring outside the lines, throwing the spaghetti, and making sure that play and working with purposeful companies. So I want to continue to work with underestimated founders, underestimated people that are solving real business problems, making the world a better place. I know that's a big fluffy word, but making people feel better, making
Julie,
it healthy.
I was just going to say, for children, play is part of their natural state of being, but we talk less about playing as an adult. And I'm thinking of Brene Brown and some of the work that she's done around the impacts of play. But just how important is play, or the concept of play, for adults?
Oh, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. And because we stopped playing, because either we had this teacher that told us, no, this is wrong, you can't do this. And then you have that you have these voices that says, I can't. And you're in this fixed mindset. And it's a way I do games before we're doing brainstorming session and creating safe spaces. So people will play and be silly and fun in safe spaces. The other word for play is curiosity. And that opens, it might be a safer word, but being curious, asking questions. That's what kids do. The why, and asking questions. And it is part of our DNA that that's shut down because this is the way it's supposed to be. And this is the template we need to follow. And if through our whole conversation, inverting norms, working with women and people who invert the norms and bringing this kind of stuff, we'll get to the end of the goals, but through a different process and trying new ways.
Absolutely. I have intense curiosity about everything. And if you were to talk to my husband, he would say that I am the Google queen, because anything that I hear and I don't understand, or it's a word I don't understand, or it's a concept, I'm just Google, because I'm constantly curious. So for me, curiosity is one of what I consider my superpowers. I'm genuinely curious about the people that I talk to and their journey and what led them to be here and what they went through. And I guess that makes it easy for me to talk to people live on air. But I wouldn't have got to this point if I hadn't been curious about, what if I took away that fear that stops me showing up on live broadcast shows? What if I took that fear away and just did it anyway? Because I know that I'm already curious about people. I know that by sharing and getting to the bottom of what people know and understand and sharing it with the world, it's stories that connect people together. And if you're curious about people's stories, then you'll find gold nuggets of wisdom and knowledge that other people can use. And that's the way we develop a better world and a better humanity. And Julie, why do you think that adults stop being curious? It has to be more than just they mature. It has to be something else, doesn't it, that stops people being curious about this person's journey or that person's journey?
I think it goes back to fear. and not being in a safe
Yes.
space. You know, this is my comfort zone. This is what I know. I'm afraid to break that open. And this is what I've taught, and this is what's around me.
Yeah.
And also judgment, fear of being judged. You know, this is something that I've really learned a lot with SHEeo, the racial justice working groups, and
Yes.
the indigenous lens, and not being afraid to ask, and literally trying to put on the lenses of others. So I think people, again, I go back to Carol Dweck's concept of growth mindset to fixed mindset. You've had that teacher, you've had feedback that says you're wrong. And that goes, and then to Brené's shame versus guilt. It's not about you, it's the actions and getting that confidence back. And it gets to be scary, because at a certain age, you're supposed to be one way. And so it's a combination of fear, judgment, and the unknown.
And we need people to be fearless, because when people are fearless, they show up in a different way. So if I'd said a couple of years ago, oh my God, I'm too scared to get behind a microphone, or I'm too scared to show up on my video, then I wouldn't have gotten to have wonderful conversations with people like Julie Trell, because there's people listening that need to hear what Julie has to say. There's CEOs listening who need to hear what Julie has to say, because it might solve the problem they're having with their team and driving them forward. Yeah. It's a different idea. It's different ideas and different concepts that drive us forward. And it's having those conversations that provide that information, allow us to grow as humanity. And I really believe that in the next 10 years or so, that we will see humanity grow more in terms of intelligence, but also in terms of spiritual knowledge and understanding and growth, and how our minds function. And that's important, isn't it, Julie?
It is. I'm really inspired about your journey as well. And you have been an inspiration to me. You know, you've started this podcast, and you get to be curious every day, and you get to, and I also want to add that you are making me look and feel good. So thank you for, the beginning of this pandemic, patience zero.
Yeah. And I discovered that my curiosity is not a bad thing. My curiosity helps make other people shine. And I couldn't have said that to you 2 years ago. I was an introvert. I was too scared to get on a phone call with someone I didn't know. There's no way, if you told me 2 years ago that I would be speaking to this amazing person live on air and broadcasting all over the world, I would have laughed at you. But you see, by taking on fear and by thinking outside the box and discovering that there is a different way of doing things, that not everything has to be traditional TV, traditional radio, traditional broadcasting, that you can create awareness, and you can create shows in other ways, a different way of thinking. And I identify so much with everything that Julie's saying about coloring outside the box, because I've always felt that way. I've always felt that I was the lone person in the room going, hey, but what about this? That, like, why have you not looked at this?
But you're not
the person going,
you're not alone.
I'm discovering that. Look at this beautiful puppy on the screen here. This is Julie's gorgeous dog, Hershey. Did I say that right?
Yep, Hershey, like the chocolate and the pronouns.
Yeah. And she's this beautiful, fluffy, shaggy, gorgeous, cuddly dog.
Playful and curious.
Yes. Playful and curious. And I was hoping that she'd make a spotlight in the show today so that we could show off how gorgeous she is.
She is there.
Yeah. Thanks, Julie. She's lovely. Julie, this whole playful purpose concept that you've been working on for a while now, you want that to become part of the norm with which we try and move organizations and businesses forward, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. And when you were telling your story, I flashed back to my second grade teacher. And the reason I went into teaching was because of her name was also Vicky, of all things.
Yes. Yes.
It was always color outside the lines. None of our art projects in the classroom all looked alike. And what I loved about her, we would make a picture or a drawing or whatever, and she wouldn't say, what's that? Because that is the judgment of like, oh no, it needs to look like something. She would always ask saying, tell me about your picture. So it encouraged conversation. It encouraged, and it's really what you're doing also. It's encouraged conversation. And I could tell it from my point of view. And it was this beautiful, safe space. So I guess, thinking back, recognize that creating a safe space for this to happen, for the creativity and plays is paramount for a thriving company, for customers, for, the safe space to be heard. That was the other thing that was really big for me. And so with Playful Purpose, that's what I want to instill. And it's still new. I'm still marinating. I'm still being curious. I'm still designing, which I will always be. I always say a lifelong learner, or it's going to get boring. A lifelong player. And that's really what I would love to do. And I think that the audience in the corporate space, being able to speak both the languages, if you will, is helpful. And again, also getting comfortable with not being the expert, but being able to hold space where people can figure out what they need to. When I do mentoring, I'm doing a couple working with founders, I say, I'm Glinda the Good Witch. And everyone in this conversation is, Glinda, we're a lot of people in a room, because Glinda didn't give Dorothy the answer. Dorothy always had the answer with her. Glinda from Wizard of Oz. So just to put that in context, she always had the ruby slippers on, and all she had to do was, tap into herself to get that answer. And so I like to play either the producer, the Glinda, different kind of roles, and helping those light bulbs, I'm mixing so many metaphors here, the light bulbs, the ruby slipper clicks in corporate with managers, new managers, old managers, how to manage millennials, how millennials manage boomers, all of that.
Because it's different. It's different. It's a different conversation to have between the different generations, because we all think differently. But then that comes back to that curious mindset. What is it that will draw that information? Because in any corporate arena, there are answers to whatever issues or problems you have. You just need to ask the right questions. So getting curious will draw the creativity and the wisdom from the people that you're working with. And I can see in corporations across the world better conversations and better answers by asking better questions and being curious. So I can see where Playful Purpose can be that arena where those things happen, and the better questions and the better, what's a different way of doing this that gets the answers that we need or gets the outcomes we need. It's not working this way, so let's try another way. And you do that all the time, Julie.
Yes. And again, when you're asking the right questions, also listening with that curiosity and what sparks joy, and a lot of the times we're having conversations and you're thinking about what's the next thing I need to say and be right about it, and letting go of that, of that habit, and opening up to what's possible. I keep looking up here because I wrote, this is my sign about.
Oh, that's beautiful. See, that's the thing, Julie. It's stuff that inspires us doesn't have to be perfect. It can be stick figures on a drawing if you know what that means to you and that inspires you and gets the creativity going within your brain. I think that's the thing about women, is their ability to create is often underestimated. If you think about it, women have that, it's built into us. It's an innate part of who we are, is to be created. We create other humans at the end of the day, and we do that without thought, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah. And also having the tribe or the mob or the, the tittas, which is a indigenous word for sister who has your back.
I love that word. It's beautiful, isn't it?
It is. It is. And just, making sure that you're in a safe space. Again, I keep talking about safe spaces to step out and do it.
No.
That women are not going to judge you. Now, I know then there's the other side of the story with the whole tall poppy thing, which is a phenomenon that I've watched.
I was just going to say, Julie, I'm Australian. I know what the tall poppy syndrome is, and I've experienced it firsthand. How was that for you to discover that as an American gal coming into Australia and watching some of this tall poppy syndrome? We love to knock each other, and it's so harmful.
Yeah. Well, I came from the other side of the spectrum where everyone was their ego was so big and they exaggerated everything and everything was so awesome.
Yeah.
And that works to a degree. And I wanted to figure out how I could bring somewhere in the middle to this humble, tall poppy is a little bit about the humbleness because people don't want to stick their head up. I think I know a little bit why is Australia's a lot smaller. It's a country of 25 million versus in the US, it's 330 million. And, so you're keeping track of your own stuff and your little slice of the pie and your crumb versus baking a bigger pie. But I don't know, it's watching from the outside. I just want to push people and say, go and do this. And it's that judgment thing. It's the judgment thing. If I go out there, somebody's going to judge me, and people need to stop judging. And Brene Brown Brene Brown has that beautiful quote about being in the ring, the arena.
I love it. That's my favorite quote of all time. If you're not in the arena, then you don't have the right to criticize. So I've got that in my room, and I often read it because I'm conscious of that all the time. How dare you?
Let me go back to with a lot of the principles of improv. If you've ever taken workshops or classes, you have to let that go. That's the other part of where improv can, you move forward. And I've been in classes and jam sessions. Oh, I should have said that. I should have said, but more you practice it, the more you let go and you move on. And that will help also letting go of the judgment and what other people think when you're in that safe play environment.
Yeah. As you know, my platforms are based in America. So I actually get the privilege of talking to a lot of Americans all the time. And I have to say that I haven't actually come across a lot of egos, mostly because I try and work with heart-centered entrepreneurs and female business owners. But every now and then I'll come up across that big American ego, and it kind of almost bowls me over. And my Aussie, oh my goodness gracious me, kind of, oh wow, okay. But yes, I know that it was a struggle for me to get past that tall poppy syndrome, thinking that I wasn't worthy. But everyone is worthy. Everyone has the power to stand in their own space. And again, as Brene would, stand on your sacred ground. Don't puff up. Don't be small, but stand in your sacred ground. And it's taken me, and I know a lot of other women that I talk to, it takes a while to find your space and your sacred ground. And I love that taps into the idea of our Indigenous populations and their sacred ground. It reminds me that you own a space in this world, and that's important. And your job is to find what that space is and stay in that space, because from that space, all good things grow and flow and are beautiful.
And we need to remind people, it's the validation on the positive side. We need to remind them that they need to be there, that they are there. I was just at a conference and I said just this, we need to make them look and feel good. That's,
Yes. Absolutely, Julie. Absolutely. I've just looked at the time and realized that we are completely out of time. I'm really just so privilege to have you on the show, Julie. To have you say that I've created a safe space for you to be who you are makes my absolute day, because behind everything that Radio Toni and Toni TV does is about creating a safe safe space for people to shine, because when they do, their wisdom and knowledge is on display for the universe, and there will be someone out there that needs to hear Julie Trell's words today. And I'm so happy I was able to facilitate that. Julie, thank you so much for being on Radio Toni Every Day Business. Audience, it's been a privilege having Julie. If you want any information about Julie or how to connect with Julie, please jump onto radiotoni.com. You will find Julie's information on my website. For those of you listening live, all the links will be up in the chat boxes across Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, everywhere else as we go off air today. Julie Trell, thank you so much.
Thank you, Toni.
I'm going to let you go. And my audience, that's it for today. Big hugs for that puppy, Julie.
She's now chill. Chill puppy.
Oh, good. And audience, we will see you next week. I'm your host, Toni Lontis, and bye for now.